unpredictably, you can't necessarily tell what's going to work in the future. And so the Darwinian process solves that by generating quasi-random variations and letting whichever one by happenstance happens to work in that environment survive. Now, it's not random precisely because the underlying structure is conserved. It's very rare that a child would be born with an extra arm or something like that. And like the skeletal structure that you inhabit is shared by animals going way, way back in evolutionary history. There's a lot of conservation in the evolutionary process, so there's variation within conservation. Like music, it's a good way of thinking about it. So the stories that we tell have exactly the same structure. They have this core element with variations. And so, all right, I'll turn to the stories. And so the first problem, as I mentioned, is a complexity problem. Things are just too complicated to get a handle on. And that actually has serious consequences, because what happens to everyone eventually is that their lives become so complicated that they die. So, and many terrible things can happen to you on the way to dying as well that are complexity related, right? You can develop a serious illness that you can't get a handle on. You can hit what would you call an impasse in your relationship that you cannot get past and see no way out of. That happens to people quite frequently. People who are suicidal, for example, they often feel like they've been backed into a corner, that they have no options. They have no good options. No matter which way they turn, there's something terrible to face, and they can't see any way out of it. And sometimes that's more true than you'd like to think, because we also tend to like to think that people's problems are primarily psychological, but they're not. And that's one thing you learn quite rapidly as a clinician, is that most of the time people don't come to you because they have mental illness. They come to you because they have a complexity management problem. Their lives have got out of hand on them, and they don't know how to get them back under control. And so all sorts of things can do that. And then, of course, that can make you anxious or depressed. It can trigger all sorts of illnesses. But the fundamental problem is still that things have got beyond you. And that actually has a psychophysiological cost that isn't merely psychological. You have a limited amount of capacity from a resource perspective to deal with emergent complexity. There's just not enough of you. You'll exhaust your psychophysiological resources if you get into a situation that's too complex. Well, that's what the idea of chaos represents. It represents that underlying complexity that can manifest itself at any time. And it can manifest itself, for example, if you wake up in the morning and you feel an ache of some sort.